real conversation, and some hard truths. Gangs, drugs, and guns. Giving a voice to those willing to sacrifice. We have stories that need to be told. We have lessons that need to be taught. Protect and serve. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. So welcome back, everyone. Nathan Ramos with you again. And today in studio, we have Dr. Sandy Jung with us. Dr. Jung is a psychology professor at MacEwan University in Edmonton and is a registered forensic psychologist. She's an active researcher, and as part of her psychology crime lab, she focuses on the risk and management of individuals who have perpetrated sexual assault, child sexual exploitation, and intimate partner violence. She's published over 50 papers, chapters, and reports, as well as a book on the management of sexual abusers. She collaborates with law enforcement, forensic mental health, and other academic institutions in Canada and internationally. She teaches abnormal and forensic psychology and actively supervises honors and advanced research students, all of which I hope listen to this, and is an assistant adjunct professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Alberta. So welcome, Dr. Jung.
Great. Thank you.
So, I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. And as I was joking with you back forth in an email, everybody's talking about the Dahmer series on Netflix. So everybody's obsessed with that. But we're not here to analyze him. So, but we'll get into some similar kind of topics. But, we kind of start at the beginning with most people. Can you kind of tell us about yourself, where you come from, how you got into this field, everything in between?
Okay. Wow, that's a huge question. Well, I'll start with where I'm from. I'm born and raised in Vancouver. So I went to UBC, and originally when I went there, it was interesting because I really wanted to go into psychiatry. I knew I wanted to study, abnormal behavior. I wanted to do something clinical at that time. But when I went to UBC in the psych department, they had at the time really a strong forensic program. There's only 3 people that were there, but these were huge names in the field. What happened was I got to work in a few of the labs. One of them was Dr. Robert Hare, and he's, for people who are really familiar with psychopathy or psychopaths, you often think of, Robert Hare because he created the psychopathy checklist. What he ended up doing was that he created this list for us to evaluate whether a person can actually, meet the criteria for being a psychopath. And one of the assignments he created for us to do was he sent off all of us to read one of the novels he assigned, about 5 novels, and all of them were on a serial killer. So it was, John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, all the ones that we kind of think about, from way back when. One of them that I chose was one on Diane Downs because it was pretty rare that you see a female be a serial killer. And she, what she had done in that particular scenario, she tried to kill 3 of her children. And one of them she did kill, but the other 2 she had severely damaged, right? So their head injuries, sort of not ever really fully recovered from it. But we used the psychopathy checklist and we actually scored them on each of these serial killers. And so it really got me interested in kind of understanding why. Why are these individuals the way they are? Why are these people doing these things? And what makes them different from everyone else? So it really kind of got me kind of going in that direction. What I wanted to do was I originally wanted to work with young offenders. So I decided to pursue more studies. I went to, of all places, Thunder Bay. Very interesting place to live.
The booming metropolis of
booming metropolis.
Psychiatry.
Not the most diverse either. So, so I was a rarity there. I'm Chinese in background, and so you can imagine going there. It's like very, very different. In that people never, they don't have a very strong minority sort of group there. So when I went there, I didn't think anything of it, but clearly people did not they just assumed that I was from somewhere else, not from Canada. But one thing I fast learned when I did my master's degree was I did not want to work with youth. It's funny because that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to work with young offenders. And at that point, I decided this is just not for me at all, like not at all. So it was a challenge to work with youth and their families, especially those who are part of the justice system. And so I decided to apply to a very different program for my PhD, and I ended up studying eyewitness testimony and investigative interview. So I went in that direction for a bit for my PhD. But it kind of brought me back around again because I started working in a clinic in Victoria, and that's where I did my PhD. And so one of the things I started doing was running programs for individuals who had committed sexual abuse. And so I started running those programs in the community and just kind of went right back to working with offenders again, but adults this time.
Wow.
Yeah.
So do you have any, well, maybe we'll kind of go way back to the beginning. Do you have any family that were involved in this kind of work? Did anybody kind of guide you to this, or is this is all on your own?
This is all on my own. Yeah. I'd say I'm probably like the first generation of people in my family who went to university, period.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So prior to that, no one else went to university. My sister went to university too, but I'm the only one that got a PhD in the end. And I know that was a little different because I don't think my parents expected me to keep going. But in order to actually be in this field, you really kind of have to pursue, higher degrees in order to be a psychologist, to be in the field, to actually work with people in the justice system. So it kind of worked out for me, at least.
I imagine being in this field, you have to maintain that. So you are constantly taking courses or constantly learning.
Yeah, it's constantly learning. Oh my God, the field is ever changing too, right? So it's not just getting further degrees. It's because research changes the way we look at things. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm evaluating someone, for example, when I left Victoria, I came to Edmonton to work at Forensic Mental Health. And the reason why is because I started running or facilitating the sex offender programs here. It was really good, but one thing that I learned as I was in that field was that the way we look at treatment and the way we do assessments keeps changing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to say that, what I did about, 20 years ago is the same what I do right now, but it's not even close, right? Yeah. Things we learned over time about offenders, but about also what kind of risk assessment tools we use to evaluate people completely change. And I mean, I know the same thing happens in policing as well, the way you do things, 20, 30 years ago, completely different than the way you do things now. So, yeah.
So, you've done a bunch of traveling for school. How much schooling in total, or to get the PhD and the master's, and then you would have a bachelor's before that? So is this like 12, 16 years we're kind of going on?
And you're bringing that up. That's really depressing, but it's a while. I think if I calculate how many years, oh my God, you're talking, I won't say exactly how many. I'll say 10 plus years that I've been in school. But what took me the longest is my PhD. Yeah, for sure.
What is a PhD? What's kind of entailed in like doing all these extra degrees?
So, when you do your master's degree, it starts changing once you start doing graduate programs, right? You have to do a thesis, create and carry out a research project on your own. And you've got to really kind of contribute something to the literature from that. When you do your PhD, it's even bigger, right? So you've got to do something that is something you've done fairly independently. It's not really stemming from your supervisor's, research. It's got to be something that you are contributing, that you've created and really kind of like hypothesize what you're aiming for. So my PhD, for example, I was looking at denial among sex offenders, and my interest was in that because I was running groups at the time. So the first thing that I thought of was, why is it that certain guys in my group, I liked working with, and the ones I did not like working with, and of course most people kind of go, well, they're all, labeled as sex offenders. Why would you even think that, right?
Yeah.
But it's just easier when you have you build rapport with someone and you're able to do therapy with them. So for me, what I realized is that one of the things that distinguished some of them was some of them accepted responsibility and some of them really minimized, made excuses, kind of bullshitted their way through, the groups. And I realized those are the ones I had huge challenges with, right? So
how do you know that they're lying or they're not taking it serious or whatever they might be doing?
I'd love to say that credibility assessment would work in a group program. But I think at the end of the day, it comes down to how consistent are they in terms of their behavior. So they can talk the talk all they want, but if they don't do any of that outside of the group, do anything outside of the program where they say they're going to actually follow up with things or attend appointments or not frequent places that they know they shouldn't, hang around with people that they know they should not be exposed to. If they don't follow up with that, then it's just they're just talking the talk, right?
This sounds exactly like everybody we deal with that's on probation or parole.
Yes, absolutely.
Those are the exact conditions they all get.
Huge overlap.
A lot of them don't follow them. Nothing really seems to happen with them after, but that's a gripe for another podcast. But so you're working with these groups, and how do you find them? Like when you're trying to deal with them, maybe and as a female, do you get a different reaction from them, or do they? I want to say, like, are they more compliant because they're talking to you? Does it make a difference?
It's no one really asked me about that. It's kind of funny. The first thing that I thought of when I started working in this field was my age. And I was thinking, when you start working in the field, you're young and you figure you're green and you're going to be easily persuaded or let's say manipulated, to kind of agree to certain things or approve things that they wanted to do, like a certain position that they wanted to take on or job they want to take on. So I felt like that was the first thing that really stood out for me was there's that bit of an age gap. You have an older guy in front of you who's committed multiple offenses, and how are they going to respect me as a young person, who's making decisions about them? In terms of the, when I think about being a female, I think one of the things that stood out for me was I'd probably say the combination between being young at that time and also being female was an interesting combination. I don't think I really faced. It's funny. A lot of people kind of think, "Oh, you work with mostly sex offenders," and that was my primary sort of, I'd say, client that I work with. That if you're a female working with that population, isn't it kind of uncomfortable working with them, talking about sexuality, talking about their sexual behaviors, about their relationships, about, how often they masturbate, how often, how many sexual encounters they've had, that kind of thing. You've got to really be comfortable with the material. And I always was. So I was very comfortable with asking the questions, but asking it in a way that was not going to be judgmental, in a way that was going to be, I'm going to scoff at some things that they say. So you just avoid doing that. It's like this game face that you go into an interview with, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I worked a short stint in our sexual assault section, and I know some of the material that can come up, and you're trying to describe it, whether you're talking to a victim or the potential accused person, right. But you kind of got to remain matter of fact.
Yes.
And and some of the interview courses I've taken, like they talk about just, you go in and, this person you're dealing with physically could be repulsive or really gross. You're still going to shake their hand. You're still going to treat them with dignity and respect. And because you're there with a purpose.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting to hear it's still the same. But I guess a lot of the stuff you do plays into the whole interviewing aspect. So,
yeah. It's interesting you bring up that whole, like someone who's gross or someone who has a very strong smell attached to them. Yes. Oh my God. Yeah, it's funny how our nose can get acclimatized to things when you're stuck in a room with someone for a long period of time. And most of the time I'm okay with that. But I think I realize there's certain distinct smells that I cannot get acclimatized to. Like one of them is feces. So I had one client who actually shit himself before he came into the meeting, and I'm like, oh God, this interview is going to be brutal.
He was that scared.
He couldn't contain himself. I've had people who had actually peed while they're meeting with me, and I was sort of like, oh, okay, don't draw too much attention to that. Just kind of keep going with the interview. That I can handle.
So you've already done 50% of policing then.
No, I think you guys have it a little worse.
Yeah, well, I've had to wrestle with said people.
Yes.
But, so you do the master's, the PhD. Where do you kind of go from there? So once you've accomplished these, how do you transition into the working world?
It's interesting. When I came to Edmonton from Victoria, the first thing I started doing is running the programs there and facilitating the group programs. It was interesting because you're no longer, especially getting licensure. So once when you're a psychologist, you need to get a license. And so I went through the licensing process within a year. And once you have your license, you are independent, right? There's no one co-signing for you. There's no one saying, okay, let me review your reports and then we'll send them out. These are all on you.
So you can open your own practice
Yes.
deal?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always say to my students, it sounds like a great idea to immediately open a private practice once you finish your PhD, but you do realize nobody else is overseeing what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're working in a forensic field and you're sending off a report to the court, no one else evaluates that except for you. So your opinion is literally that, what's contained in that report.
Do you fall under what's the doctor one? College of Physicians and Surgeons?
Right. So there is a College of Alberta Psychologists.
Mm.
So each province has its own. And so CAP would be the acronym for that one. And that's where you get licensed. Yeah.
Okay. So they license, but they're not reviewing your work necessarily.
No. You go through sort of all the exams and there's an oral exam, a written exam. Now there's a jurisprudence exam, so you understand the laws and whatnot in Alberta. But you need to complete all that in order to actually be fully licensed.
Okay. So you take care of all that. You're licensed. You're running some of the programs.
Right.
What do these programs look like, and what are you doing while you're there?
So it's been a little while since I've done this, since I've been at MacEwan. What I did was, you do two separate things, multiple things. But one of the things you do is assessment. So assessments that you do for the courts are to determine, their level of risk to the judge. And so you do a full workup. For me, I would, administer different psychometric tests. And then I'd provide an opinion about what level of risk this person is at, right? Any concerns about mental health as well. The treatment side of things, it's mostly going to be in a group format. So you have maybe anywhere from about 10 to 20 guys in one room. They're all male because trying to include a female in one of the group programs is a little bit more challenging. There's different issues that you can't really address in a group full of guys in there. So we'd run those programs for at that time it was about 20 weeks. They'd come in after work, in the evenings, and we'd cover a lot of different areas, risk factors that are relevant to their sexual offending. So things like their sexual self-regulation, how do they cope with things? Do they use sexual kind of activities to do that? Do they use porn? Are they able to replace that with things that are more healthier, pro-social? And also addressing, the biggest thing is addressing their thinking, right?
Yeah.
It's, I mentioned about justifications and excuses that people will make for their behavior. It's a pretty common thing. It's not just offenders, right? Every human being does that. But how do you address the ones that are most relevant to their sexual offending behavior? So we try to identify what those are for them.
So is this kind of similar to maybe like Alcoholics Anonymous or something, where the first step is admitting you have the problem? Is that kind of like is that where the steps kind of form out of?
Yes and no. It's interesting in the field of looking at sexual violence. In the past, when they looked at someone who did not accept responsibility for their behavior, the first thing that people would consider is not including them into a group program because they weren't taking any responsibility. What we know these days is that we need to actually include those individuals in a group program, even though it's incredibly challenging to have someone in there who's going to say, I didn't do this. I don't know why I'm here. I think that, the victim should be here, not me. It's, I'm not one of these perverts who are in the room. Right. Mm-hmm. So you'll often get that kind of feel, and you kind of go, how do you include someone like that in a group program when no one else is expressing that, right? Or they're expressing different variations of it. And so these days, the key thing is including them so that they get exposed to other people who are in there, who are taking different levels of responsibility, and they start seeing value in why they're there, right? Maybe they aren't the same as someone else in there, but what can I get from this so I can not be in this room again?
Yeah. Yeah, because you can always learn from somebody else. You don't have the exact same experience, but...
Right.
Yeah. So you were talking about doing some of the assessments for court. Mm-hmm. Is that like the not criminally responsible, that kind of designation?
No, they're more for sentencing. So, the judge might have someone where they've either found guilty or the defendant has pled guilty. And at that point, they make a determination about their sentence. And so they want to glean more information. They want to know what level of risk this person's at. So they'll request for a pre-sentence report. You often see that with young offenders. So you see youth who go through the court system, they'll always ask for something like a PDR, predisposition report. And then if you look for adults, what you'll see is that there's a section in the criminal code that says, that you can ask for a pre-sentence report and actually get that information so it can guide the the judge in terms of what they can, what degree would they want to actually, put this person in further number of months or additional years, or in terms of supervision and also incarceration.
Do you find that if I guess is it the more, I'll say, issues a person has, the shorter their sentence, or is it really just, it's like depending on a whole lot of factors?
Oh, it's a lot of factors. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you look at most sentencing reports, I mean, the judge has to look at past cases, of course, but one of the things that they will take in consideration is, if they look at the pre-sentence report and this person's, scores quite high in terms of their overall risk, in terms of committing another violent act or another sexual violent act, then they really want to place some weight on that and determine where they're going to place them to. Because if you, put them in, if you give them a federal sentence, they're going to get different kinds of treatment and different kinds of programming, right? Versus, a provincial sentence.
Because my thinking is like, if somebody's a higher risk, or they have more things to deal with, I guess, maybe you're looking at keeping them in longer, and they're getting more programming because you know where they are and you can essentially make them go, or at least put them in the seat, whether they participate or not. That's a different story. But, so is that kind of, is that true? Is that like how that would happen? Like you can keep them in longer to make them do more rehabilitation or whatever it might be? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the big considerations. If you have someone who has repeat offending, right, and they are deemed, a moderate to high risk, then of course giving them a longer sentence, meaning that they can go through a federal system, go through a full treatment program through, Saskatoon or in Bowden, as opposed to going to a provincial program, which is a little bit more limited in what kind of program they offer, and it's going to be much more short term, right? Because it's going to be less than 2 years, and they may not be put in those programs immediately. They will sit in, a prison system for several months before they're actually referred to that program.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and and some of the stuff I was looking at when I was looking up your bio for McEwen, you had mentioned there like measures of violence and risk, excuses and cognitions of offenders. So we're kind of talking on these right now. Maybe we'll stay with this, but I'll get back to another thing. I was going to ask how you got to McEwen, but since we're on this, I'll stay here. How do you measure some of this? So how do you tell a person is a high risk?
Right. So you do need to do a full interview, gather collateral information. There's a whole kind of process you go through as a risk assessment. So usually when I carried out these assessments, I would interview them anywhere from about 2 to 3 hours. It could be across 1 or 2, sort of sessions, might be even additional ones if necessary. I'd usually try to gather collateral information. That could be in a number of ways. It could be past reports that were done on them. If they were on probation before, I'd get, some of the probation reports that were on them. If there's people that I can contact who would give me a different idea about their character, about their behavior, individuals who know about their offending, so then I'd want to glean that information from them.
Like
too.
Family? And
could be family, yeah. I'd probably say that most of the offenders that I saw who committed sexual offenses may not have told their families, or they don't know the nature of their offense that they're in courts for. So oftentimes they will say no.
Yeah. I'm thinking like maybe you contact the family to see if they experienced something while they were growing up, or
Right. So getting background information is definitely one thing I'd probably glean as well. Like getting collateral to tell me a bit about their upbringing. How they were in school, did they do well in school? What was their attitude growing up, kind of thing. Were they respectful to adults, that kind of thing. So I try to gather some of that information. But you have to be really careful about that, of course, because I can't share why am I doing an assessment on them, right?
Okay.
Can't share that they're in for a sexual assault and, they have 3 charges against them and this is, before the courts right now. So I can't share any of those details unless they already know already, right? And so if they tell me, it's fine. But for me to share that with them, and if what they were, completely not in the know of it, then it's a huge issue. So I've got to keep that kind of away from that interview if I'm going to engage them.
Yeah, because you're trying not to, I guess, skew kind of the answers they give you.
Right, or give them information that they didn't know, right?
Yeah,
you can imagine with asking for consent from the client is really key, right? So they need to know that if I'm going to be contacting them, they're going to be wondering, why am I asking them these questions? They might even ask me about, details with regards to the court, right? And why they're even, what the nature of the offense was and who the victim was. And so I can't share those things with them. So I always make it clear that if I'm going to be doing this, it's important for you to contact them. Let them know I'm going to reach out to them.
Yeah.
And you can share whatever you want with them. But keep in mind, if they ask me questions about this, I can't tell them this information.
Yeah. Okay. So how did you go from doing these jobs to MacEwan?
Well, it's funny because when I came to Edmonton, before even coming to Edmonton, I was actually applying for academic positions. So I already knew I was going to go into an academic route. But this position came up. And so that's why I ended up coming here, working with Alberta Health Services for a number of years before I went to MacEwan. I really enjoyed it. I was a little bit surprised that I wanted to kind of continue in a clinical role for a while. But one thing I was missing when I was there is doing research. There's no time when you're a clinician to do any research at all. So as much as I can try to do that, you just don't have time to write it up, analyze data, that kind of thing. So the position came up at MacEwan for teaching. And I missed a little bit of the teaching too. I was doing some teaching when I was in Victoria. And I ended up applying to that position because I kind of thought, there I can actually do that. And I can maybe maintain a little bit of clinical work. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did not maintain clinical work. It's just, there's no time. Right? Yeah. You're either one or the other kind of thing. Yeah. So I did it for about a year. I did continue to run groups for about a year after I started MacEwan, but I just couldn't do it any longer. And it was great because a few years into it, I still did some pre-sentence reports and I brought some of my students and they actually got to sit in with me. But I couldn't manage to do sort of both of them anymore. So I really just focused on research and teaching. And, I love teaching. I'm not teaching at the moment because I'm in an administrative position, but I was teaching up to about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And I usually teach about 6 courses a year. And it's fun because the students they glom onto forensic. They love the abnormal side of things, but as soon as you start talking about, the justice system and talking about offenders and talking about risk assessment, you could tell the passion that kind of goes into that field.
What's the difference between abnormal and forensic? I would think things in forensic are abnormal.
Yes, in a different way, not justice involved. So abnormal is more focused on, like the psychological disorders, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety disorders, and giving kind of a bit of a survey of all the different mental disorders, whatever you can fit in half a year, that is, right?
Yeah.
And then in forensic, of course, it's focused on the whole spectrum of things. So anywhere from the time that a person has committed a crime, where it involves police investigations, credibility assessments, to the sentencing process and understanding the criminal justice system. Laced with that is understanding, you mentioned before, NCR, so not criminally responsible, looking at their competency and standing a trial in court. And then up until the time that you're dealing with a person who is, a violent or a sexual offender. And even looking at cases of, like homicide and youths who committed offenses as well. Mm-hmm. So you start looking at the whole spectrum from the time that the person gets charged all the way to the time that they are released from prison.
Kind of talking just about the NCR process. Have you been involved in those much, or can you comment on them?
Yeah, so I have been part of a team before.
Okay.
So usually in Alberta, what happens is you have a team of people who work on an assessment. The psychiatrist usually authors the final report at the end, but there's usually a social worker and there's usually a psychologist who carries out some psychological testing. Oh, okay. And so I usually take on that part of it. It's been interesting. I've sat on that team a few times. And I used to run actually treatment programs for them. So that was more the side that I kind of work with NCR patients. But it's interesting because the assessment process is, anywhere from 30 to 60 days when they assess them. And all you're providing is the report. And it's really the judge that comes down to that final decision, whether or not they disregard what you put in the report or not.
Yeah, I always, I don't think anybody has an idea of how they work. I didn't know it was a team. But so what's kind of the thinking behind those? So if a person's not mentally fit to, is it stand trial or is it fit to, be happy with what they've done? I don't know.
So there's 2 aspects of it. So there's the standing trial part, which is assessed to determine whether or not they can actually proceed with the trial, right? And that also involves a team that does the fitness assessment. So, in order for them to be competent to stand trial, then they can proceed if they're deemed competent. If they're not deemed competent, then they get either held in a facility for a period of time until they become more cognizant, more able to actually see the differences, in terms of what's real, what's not. They could have a number of different kinds of diagnoses, but really at the end of the day, it's psychosis. That's really, the concern is that does this person actually distinguish real from fiction, right? So once that's determined, they can go to court. So that's a fitness assessment. But the other thing where you're talking about is NCR, so not criminally responsible for on account of mental disorder. You're talking about now they're fit for trial. They go through the trial process, but they've, their side has declared that they are basically they were not competent at the time when they actually carried out the act, right? So they are not right mind. Again, usually due to psychosis. So then it's a different determination. And then they go through a very different process through a review board rather than going through the court system.
Wow.
Yeah.
I find the stuff with mental health is so complicated because you never have just one thing. It's like 10 things always overlapping. Whereas, you get a physical injury. It's like you have a broken bone, fix the broken bone, done. The mental side of things, very, there's so much to it, so intricate. So
yeah, I wish there was a way for us to diagnose that involved, some blood tests or something like that. Wouldn't that be easier? But yeah, unfortunately, no. You're talking about a full assessment workup, that it really relies at the end of the day on expert opinion, right? And so that's quite different than you think about sort of whether a person has cancer or not.
Yeah. Well, and that was going to be one of the questions I was going to get to was like, is there any way that you can foresee a person might maybe have one of these conditions or that they're going to offend? Kind of a minority report idea. Yeah. But can we, we can scan a brain and see that you have CTE, right? You have effects from concussions, but can we see any of this stuff?
Oh, that's a lot tougher to do, as you could probably imagine. There's some tools if we can identify certain individuals, but it's certainly not going to cover everybody that you will ever run across. So, for instance, I mentioned psychopathy before. So, if you have someone who's been assessed using the psychopathy checklist and they meet the cutoff for that, there's a pretty good chance, if that person's already been involved with the justice system, that they're likely going to commit another offense again. Right. One of the best predictors of future behavior, there's one that really stands out in psychopathy. The psychopathy checklist was never intended to be developed as a tool to predict future behavior, but it ended up being one of the better predictors. It was purely just an assessment tool to determine whether you have those personality features. But they found that when people met the cutoff for it, then what you'll find is that their level of risk significantly increases. And that means that they're likely going to reoffend again in some form or fashion.
I'm just thinking, sometimes you can hook up the brain and you can see the electrical impulses kind of firing and what part of the brain is working more. I wonder if they've ever tested anybody and just seen this guy's brain is working this way, right, and same with this one and same with this one. So maybe there's a pattern here and we can kind of determine.
Right. The hard thing is that we can't really, we're not great at predicting behavior per se, right? Because people change their minds and there's a lot of other outside factors that play a role. But we are pretty good at identifying if people have a inclination to certain things. So, for example, using magnetic resonance imaging, there's a lot of research that's moving towards looking at how that tool can be really useful if we can afford it. It's quite expensive, assessment to actually see whether or not a person has a preference for certain kinds of sexual deviancy. So using those tools for that purpose, absolutely. There's a lot more room for error for other tools that have been produced, like I'm not sure if you've heard of the phallometric testing.
No.
So yeah, some of my guys would call it, Peter meter. So basically measuring a male erection to certain stimuli that they might be exposed to, right?
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, there's some errors that go along with that. But if you're measuring the brain, it's a little bit more accurate. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things I had kind of marked down as profiling versus predictors. So we're talking about predictors. Is there any good profiling that you can do on people?
It's funny because a lot of my students will come up to me and say that, I really want to be a criminal profiler because, they watch TV and, and that always kills me. I'm like, oh no. Profiling is more of, it's less of a scientific endeavor. It's more of an art than anything. And so I think people tend to assume that if you go into profiling, you're going to learn all these skills and how to be able to be proficient at identifying, sort of like the Minority Report, and finding out who is this person who's committed this crime. To me, the best profiling is a really good investigative process, right? So really good interviewing, really solid and rigorous approach in collecting evidence. To me, those are the more valuable components of trying to profile who a person might be. But to try to profile whether a person is going to carry out a similar act again, or where it's going to happen, against which victims, that kind of thing, very difficult to try to do. I think we're better at risk assessment to determine the level that person's going to offend again, as opposed to trying to figure out who's the person and can we narrow it down. I know criminology, moves in that direction. It's a little bit out of my purview, but I know that there's a number of different approaches, like routine activity theory and a few of those kind of approaches where they can identify a little bit better, but it's certainly not foolproof. So if people are looking for foolproof, it's just not going to happen.
Well, I know some of our analysts, they do, they'll send you like a map and it'll show, we've had these B&Es in this area and there's some similarities, whether it's the means or how they get away or whatever. And then they'll use that and try and predict where the next one kind of happens. So, and then speaking of domestic violence, we fill out the ODERAs, fever forms. So there's a bunch of forms that,
right.
I don't know if they're exactly for that purpose, but it seems like they are, because we ask questions about past behavior, addictions, mental health.
Right.
And at least on the ODERA, we're giving them a score. So,
so if we go back to the first thing you mentioned, you're talking about sort of that hot spotting. And I think that is very valuable to try to see where are, more likely where crimes are going to occur. Not necessarily if it's the same perpetrator or not, but, if we're trying to identify sort of areas that are going to be hot. And for some reason, we see an increase in crime in that area. I think those kinds of techniques are quite valuable. What you're talking about with the ODERA and using the fever, it's interesting. I have done research on this with EPS, and it's definitely an area that I'm passionate about, because I'm very much about data, right? So if the data doesn't show what you want, then my view is we shouldn't be using it. So the fever was developed intended to actually gather information. It wasn't intended to be a risk assessment tool. But it ended up sort of being that by the end of it. I remember talking to a few constables where they talked about it like, oh, we use this tool and, it tells me about, whether they're going to reoffend again. I'm like, oh, that's not what it's for. It's an interview schedule, right? It helps the person at the time, the constable at the time, to gather all the relevant information and not just ask questions about the criminal behavior, but about the perpetrator's behavior. So it's great for that part. But what you're supposed to use the information for is to actually score them on an actual validated tool. So a validated tool would be the ODERA. It's well validated with Ontario Provincial Police and a few other areas, but also even in Edmonton as well. We've used the data here. It predicts really well. So if you're using that tool to try to determine risk, the ODERA would be useful for that. And so how people kind of look at these tools and they see it as a bit of a make-work project. I have to check these boxes and I don't know what to do with these things afterwards. But what we use them in forensic psychology is you take a risk assessment tool and you see where they score there. And then you make a determination about how much am I going to follow up this case, right? So it shouldn't interfere with the investigation. That should go on as normal. But if you're doing like victim services or safety planning and all those kinds of things that kind of follow up a victim to see whether or not this person is at a greater risk later on, then that's what you use the risk assessment for. If they're deemed low risk, then you kind of go, why am I wasting my time following up with them every single week?
Yeah.
Something could happen, but the thing is the risk assessment tool tells us that, that person is not a high risk. So if something were to happen, it would be something that we wouldn't have predicted. But if they're high risk, right, they're in the score of like 6, 7, 8 and that kind of thing, then what we should be doing is we should be following them up more frequently, right? Or if you're making decisions about bail, make determinations using a risk assessment tool is much more valid than kind of going, okay, I think this person has a repeat offense, so we should probably, detain them.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges we've had as a police service and even in the whole justice system, probably even in the mental health side of things, is the follow-up. There's, just the time in a day to go person to person. A lot of the people don't maintain an address. They don't maintain a phone number. Their family hasn't talked to them. So it's hard to find them. That's probably the hardest part. That's why I was thinking about this whole parole and probation. And, if somebody's a higher risk, you keep them in for longer. Right now, there's a big argument about how we just seem to let everybody go nowadays. So, yeah, I mean, the follow-up is definitely a piece that is, I would say, completely missing. We know a lot of our guys, like real high-risk guys, more for gang violence with the stuff I deal with. They get let out, they've been caught with a gun several times. And it's just, okay, and they'll be back out before I'm done my shift. Catch them the next month, back out before I'm done my shift. It's like, well, they just had a gun.
Yes.
So, and follow-up's impossible. No address, no phone numbers. Nobody will tell you anything.
Yeah, they're NFA, right? They have no fixed address. So it means, like, how do you follow up with them unless you go through their criminal peers that that they associate with? But that's the only way you can get in contact with them. You're absolutely right. I think the biggest challenge with most of I'd say the frequent, it sounds terrible, frequent flyers that you guys have, right, is that you're going to get people who are going to go through that revolving door. And unfortunately, what you end up finding is that, well, how much time do we put into that? How do you prioritize it? Is it because of how often they offend? Or is it the seriousness of their offense? And so I think some decisions have to be made. And I think each police service looks at it a little bit differently. I think my understanding with EPS is very focused on sort of the frequent flyer, right? Like if you're having someone coming through the revolving door, we want to reduce that. In the forensic world, in my world, it's more about the harm, right? So yeah, absolutely. This person may very well go out and reoffend again, but it's not against another person and it's not going to be causing serious harm. So I need to focus my energy on the person who's going to seriously commit offense.
Yeah, we have, they had a program they ran a little while ago, and they were trying to figure out which people to target, which people to deal with. And usually when you come up with some sort of scoring matrix, it's based on frequency. So this person's dealt with every single day. They just skyrocket, right? They're the number one offender.
Right.
But they're doing, I don't know, chocolate bar thefts every single day. Are they really that bad? Do we really need to deal with that person? Then with some of the people we deal with, these guys can be completely hands off of the process, but they're calling shots behind the scenes. And this is the person telling people to murder people.
Right.
Seems like a very important thing to deal with, but they never have, they have one occurrence a year with the police. So they never score on anything. So the scoring matrix, not really that great, and trying to figure out how to measure these things, quite a challenge.
Yeah, you can't capture the ones that you really want to target. That's going to, at the end of the day, reduce numbers, right? Yeah. So yeah, to me, I think that when you think about the public's interest in things, the first thing that will stand out is, they never feel, I think it's very common in research to show that the public is never happy with sentencing. They're never happy with a follow-up, right? Yeah. They always want more restrictive, more conservative than what we can do given the sentencing guidelines that are in our criminal code. But when I look at the most common complaint is they look at the violence and they look at the harm that it's done to another person. That's what they're most concerned about, right? Yeah. They don't want the harm that's done. And as much as they don't want to lose their property, they don't want, break-ins, they don't want, thefts, those kinds of things. Really, at the end of the day, those are the things that are going to be forgotten. Yeah. And what's going to be remembered is a really violent incident that led to either death or severe injury, right?
So with the work you've done with domestic violence, why is it so likely that a domestic partner is going to be at a higher risk for having an offense committed against them? And why are these such a, I don't say hot button issue, but like just a higher priority? So is it just because of the ease of access to a potential victim for whoever's offending?
When it comes to domestic violence, it's interesting. It's a different kind of category in a lot of ways, in that you know who the victim is, you know who the perpetrator is. There's no sort of hunting and searching for who that perpetrator is, right? Not like a sexual assault. When you think about a domestic violence incident, this is also something that doesn't get reported all the time, right? So when it does get reported, it's usually because it was so violent that it led to a report by another witness, or maybe the victim, decides that they are going to report this, right? But it's also more, I'd say it's a fraction of those cases where it's the victim only that reports it. So it's unique in a lot of ways. What the challenge is when you're identifying who's the highest risk, it's gathering information about their level of risk and making sure you prioritize those cases. And some people wonder, well, what are the risk factors? So to me, there's a lot of typology research that's out there. And what they kind of point out to is that the ones who are more antisocial are the ones that are going to be the most violent generally and also within the relationship. So they will commit violence outside, bar fights, assaulting the neighbor that pissed them off, and then also assaulting their spouse and maybe their kids and maybe the pet. So you'll see that, like the most severe ones. So they'll have much more frequent kinds of offenses on their record. The ones who are family only are the ones that are a little bit harder to detect because they have kind of a double life. At work, they're a great guy, get along with everyone, no problem. The neighbor thinks he's great because he rakes leaves for him and everything. But he goes home and he is very abusive in the family and maybe even coarsely controlling towards his wife, right? So you start seeing these kinds of behaviors within that relationship. But again, only detected by family members, people who are close to them, and that partner, right?
Well, yeah, and I'm thinking, we never do any of these forms for a bar assault, right? But we do them for the family one. And that kind of got me thinking, this is, if it's your spouse, this is a person you should love. You chose to live with them. So maybe why would you offend against that person? Why is this a higher risk situation? So what kind of makes it that?
Oh, now we're getting into the psychology of it. So, I mean, so you're talking about someone who, I would probably say if you start assessing the way they think, then you start getting at some of the potential risk factors that are present in those relationships, as opposed to ones that didn't involve any kind of violence or any kind of coercive control, right? So what you'll see is that one of the really good predictors of future offending behavior in domestic violence incidences is a victim's perception about the likelihood of whether or not their partner is going to actually offend.
The victim's perception.
Victim's perspective
is the predictor of whether that person will offend.
Yeah, it's unique to domestic violence. You don't see that with, sexual assault or sexual violence, or you don't see that with, like the guys who, were involved in bar fights, right? But because that partner has seen this pattern for so long, they're actually really good at assessing whether or not there's a likelihood that they're going to actually, they're going to attack them again. So that's definitely one major factor. The factor that always predicts just about any kind of future behavior is past behavior, obviously. So that's definitely another factor. But what also stands out is, when you look at their thinking, the thinking of the perpetrator, right? So, their views about their spouse, they might carry misogynistic kind of patriarchal kind of perspectives that, she should be doing these things, the sense of entitlement that they might have as well. So when you think about in psychology, we call it schemas. Basically, it's the way you think, the lens that you view the world in. Like, I deserve this and I should get mine, right?
Yeah.
When you have that kind of perspective, and if you can assess that would be really telling about whether or not this person's going to reoffend again. So we call it, cognitions, right? They're antisocial cognitions. The way they think about the world, the way they deserve things, the way they feel entitled about things. That's really stands out in domestic violence situations.
Okay. Well, I kind of wanted to talk about some of our offenders in the gang world. So one of the questions I had was, it's related to a lot of the gun violence we see right now. The guys getting involved in it, and it's 99% guys. They're getting younger and younger. And you've done some of the work with youth, but do you have any idea of why such young people can get involved in this and almost have a complete, I don't know if they have a complete disregard for the potential outcome. Maybe they're not even thinking of the potential outcome, but when I'm driving down in a neighborhood in broad daylight and I shoot up the front of someone's house, or I'm shooting at a car, those bullets don't stop. They go through walls.
Right.
So they're doing these in residential neighborhoods. So what would be going on in someone's mind when they're doing that type of stuff?
Oh, there's a few things that come to my mind. One is, when you think about anyone who carries out any violent act generally, there's a depersonalization that kind of happens too. And again, it goes back to thinking, right? It's easy for them to kind of think, well, I didn't hit anyone. I'm hitting a house. I'm not hitting an actual real person. There's no real empathy that's needed or remorse that I need to feel for that, because damaging someone's property is not a big deal, right, for them. So there's partly that they can depersonalize part of that. I think the other thing as well is, what is the most reinforcing? I mean, at the end of the day, we are all behavioral, human beings, right? We rely on reinforcement, and we rely on, what are the consequences and how close and proximal are those consequences, as opposed to, if I take my chance on this, what's the likelihood I'm going to get caught, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's really distant, right, it's very distal from me getting caught, then why not take the chance, right? As opposed to, and we think the same thing with reinforcements. What's the proximal thing? So what is the lowest hanging fruit for them that they can, reach, they can get reinforced for, versus something that's long-term, right? Having a pro-social life is distal, right, for them, right? It's like, that takes a lot of work. It's a long ways to go before I actually reap any rewards from that. But right now, if I, show sort of some force, I show, that I'm part of the gang, I'm actually carrying out some of these things, I'm going to be showing and getting reinforcement from my other members, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're part of the group. And, when you think about how gangs work, and again, human nature, you think about youths, that I've worked with, they want to feel accepted. And what's more reinforcing than being one of the guys?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that it overrides any of the other stuff that they know that they can get consequences for.
I think it's interesting talking about this, because a lot of what I'll say our management and the police see gangs as is the traditional street gang. And they have the idea that everybody comes from a broken home. Everybody's hanging out on street corners. They need the group for protection, for acceptance is a big one, which I think is a consistent theme through even some of the gangsters that we deal with now. But a lot of the guys we deal with nowadays, I'll call them like the mid to higher level, kind of in the hierarchy of things. They come from like 2-parent homes. Their parents want them to go to school. Their parents buy them a car. They have a lot of things provided for them. They have like the normal kind of nurturing life, and then they just want money and to be cool. They want to be accepted, but you're not coming from what's thought of as a broken home. Yet someone hands you a gun, says, "I'll give you $5,000 to go shoot that guy." They're willing to do it. So I kind of wonder, like, what would be the thinking in there, or what's going on in their head, and are there just this many psychopaths out there? Is that what they would be?
It sounds cliche to say this, but sex and money goes a long way, right? So, and I say this because, in the work that I've done with sexual abusers, orgasm is the biggest reinforcement for them, right? So as much as you can tell them, what would be more socially appropriate and talk about how to engage that more in their life, orgasm is very important. When you look at people who are really relying on that acceptance and the money that comes fast forward, I always call it sort of this, actually it's called in the field, behavioral economics, right? It's this idea that there's short-term costs and rewards, and there's long-term ones. And it applies here as well. What's the short-term, reward I get? Money, right?
Yeah.
So get $5,000 right now, as opposed to being a good kid and, getting my allowance, working with my parents, they're supporting me. And eventually I can probably afford to buy that thing that I really, really want to get, right? Whether it's a car or whatever it is, that gives me additional status and privilege, but I can get this money now. $5,000 for this one, and I can get another $5,000 doing another one.
Yeah.
How quickly I'm going to build that up, right? But you think about the turtle and the rabbit, right? We think about those stories from way back, and you think about you can build up this over time and slowly get there and do it safely, or you can do it really rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
And all they see is that lowest hanging fruit, right? It's the immediate gratification that they get from the money right now, that I know that if I get this now, I multiply this 5 times. If I do this across the month, wow, I'm going to get a lot of money, right? Yeah. I can be a good kid, get the support from my mom and dad, but I also get, on top of the money, I also get the acceptance, right? Now I'm one of the gang. I'm one of their partners, people that trust me now. And I feel I have a belongingness that's attached to that. So they get that reinforcement that they already had from home, a safe home, but they get the money on top of it. So I can see how the thinking can be a huge role here in justifying, the means to the end.
Mhm.
And the end comes faster when you're doing that.
But with the potential to actually kill another human being, how does one kind of distance themselves from that in their thinking? So I'm getting the money and whatever else I'm looking for, if it's women, but end of the day, now I'm going to kill somebody. And I thought that was kind of like against human nature to kill another person.
Yeah, it is. For people who may have not had an abnormal sort of background. What you're describing is you're talking about pro-social individuals who end up, in this kind of field where they're engaging in antisocial behaviors, even though they had a pretty solid upbringing. Tough to say whether or not a person has a solid upbringing when you see that they have supportive parents or that you see that they have a complete family. It doesn't look like a broken home.
Mm-hmm.
Hard to know that until you start getting into the depths of that.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, I would look more closely at that upbringing. As much as it appears on the outside to be a really solid sort of family, we see this in sexual abuse situations, right? Where everything looks great on the outside. We have an outstanding, father, raising their kids. But what you see is the kids raised in a pretty horrific upbringing, but no one would ever know that from the outside. And so for me, I'd probably want to dive into that a little bit more, into what was reinforced, what was valued. Sure, you have maybe supportive parents, but did they value money? Did they value status, or did they criticize that kid? Out of the 4 children that they have, more so than others, and are they trying to find maybe something else outside of that where they don't have to compete? So it's hard to say without kind of knowing sort of the dynamics that goes on within that family.
Mm-hmm. So no straight answer.
I know everyone wants a simple answer. I wish I could. This is why I study psychology, because it's such a complex thing, right?
Everything in our profession is just, it depends.
Yes.
It all depends. When one of the last things here, and we're coming up on an hour, and I said I don't want to keep you around that, so because I know you got to go, but when it comes to, if you look at police versus criminals, and say one can kill a person for protection, to protect another person, to protect themselves, versus a criminal who maybe is just killing for money.
Right.
What's the big difference in the mind? And is there a lot of similarities, and then there's just like one little thing that's different? Or is there, are we on a really fine line? Or is there a lot of differences?
Oh, well, you're asking really tough ones that are asking my opinion about the things. Honestly, I'm going to say this, but I'm keep in mind, I say this about all human beings. Okay. Because, I already mentioned before, I studied, denial. And the first thing that therapists would often say is that they're denying the work from the group, right? Mm. They're going to piss off everyone else. And I go, why would we ever expect anyone to not give excuses or minimize responsibility? As human beings, we do it all the time, right? If I'm late for a lunch date or something, I'm not gonna say, yeah, I finished watching my soap opera and then I took my time and I knew I was gonna be late, but I didn't care. I took the other car and I took a roundabout route. No one's gonna say that, right? Yeah. You're gonna say that, oh God, traffic sucked and construction was just all over the place. You're gonna make excuses. Mm-hmm. So why would we expect anything different? So the reason why I say that is because when you're asking about the dividing line between, an officer and someone who's offended, you have to remember they're all part of the same group, right? Mm-hmm. They're all human beings. We make decisions based on our, both our upbringing, the things we're exposed to, what is actually a status quo for us in terms of our thinking. The same kind of rewards and costs that we think about every single day, and maybe not really cognizantly. We don't spend hours thinking about it, but it's an immediate reaction, right? It's like, oh my God, there's something really quick I can get out of this. Yeah, that sounds great. I'm going to do it, right? We make decisions, even the silliest little things, like, do I actually enter something in this contest? Does it take much of my effort? Oh, I have to fill out a survey. Screw that. I'm not going to do it, right? So we are always kind of evaluating that every single day in our life. And I think the same thing happens when we're thinking about, if we're putting those two, against each other, decisions that we make, we use rational kind of decisions that go along with that. Mm-hmm. And it may not be rational to think about how a perpetrator might be thinking, but it's rational to them, right? Yeah. So if they're making a decision about killing someone, for example, or harming someone, Their decision about that is based on what is the most rational thing. If I don't do this, I'm going to get more shit from the guys I hang out with.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to fall lower on the, that social hierarchy that exists, but is not written anywhere. Right. And I'm going to get probably picked on more. So I don't want to be the sort of the victim here. I want to make sure that I'm one of the, the lions in that group. Right.
Yeah.
So there's huge decisions about that. And, we think about an officer making a decision at the time in protection. I'd love to say that everyone thinks that immediately, but the reaction is oftentimes we're always thinking about self-protection. And that's no different from whether you're an officer or if you're a person on the street who's not an officer. So I think there's that self-protective kind of component to it. So I think there's a lot of overlap when you think about the two. I think what makes it different is the rational reason behind it, right? We cannot understand why a criminal would want to commit an offense that would harm someone who potentially could be innocent or could also be another drug dealer that's a real ass, right?
Yeah.
But regardless, we're taking someone's life and they're choosing to do that, right?
Yeah.
But there's reasons why they're choosing to do that. To me, understanding the reasons behind that are incredibly valuable. We don't have to rationalize or even understand why the cop does it, but we try to understand why the offender does it. And I think once we start understanding that, not accepting it, not saying it's okay, but if we understand that, you kind of go, okay, I know where they're coming from then.
Yeah.
Right? You can kind of relate.
Well, and even, so if an officer is involved in a shooting here, they have things they deal with after. So say it's PTSD. So sometimes I feel like maybe they aren't rationalizing with themselves. Like they're not good with the situation.
Right.
So I guess it just kind of comes down to the rationality of it and how they think about it themselves.
Well, you think about with an officer, I mean, there's this kind of model that we all try to follow, right? You choose a certain profession and you think about with an officer, they're thinking, I'm protecting the public, and yet I've harmed one person, right? And that one person, could have done harm to someone else, or maybe they couldn't have, and it was an accident. There's all these kind of things that run through people's mind, and it's a mismatch. It's a mismatch between who I model after and then this person who's done this thing, right? And I think one thing we always have to try to remember, and it doesn't resolve the PTSD, but it's something that people have to come to terms with, is to try to reprocess it enough so that they can think in terms of, when I made that decision, that was a behavior. It doesn't mean that's who I am. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
And once you start reconciling that and reconciling it by actually facing it, because that's where treatment for PTSD really kicks in, is trying to reprocess it and go through the whole cycle again. Because if you don't do that, then you're claiming that if you forget it and I don't think about it, then everything's gonna be fine. But it rears its ugly head.
Yeah,
yes, exactly.
It comes back. So, kind of coming up to end of the time, is there anything you think we didn't cover, or you want to kind of make sure we covered?
I think we covered a lot of that. I apologize for going all over the place. I just feel like
that would be my fault if we're going all over the place. But there's just so much to this, and we could probably have you in here for a few more hours. Is there anywhere people can follow your work or keep track of your opinions?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can Google find me as well. But I do have a website. So if they want to take a look at any of the work that I've done or any of the papers that I have, they can email me or they can look at the website. And if it's not on there fully accessible, then they can just email me. I can send that to them.
Okay. How would they access your website? Like through the McEwen?
Through McEwen. Yeah.
Through McEwen. Okay. That's the one I was looking at. So I will, I'll throw a link up in when we get this episode up so that people can follow there. And any books or anything on the horizon?
Oh, I hate writing books. I wrote the one and I don't think I'll do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do like writing review papers. I find that that's more a bite-sized kind of thing to kind of grasp onto.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do have a few of those. If people are interested in looking at intimate partner sexual violence or, understanding risk assessment, maybe for youth, I've written a few papers recently on those. But most of my work is, and I do have a book, I'll tout it here, but it is focused on risk management of sexual abusers in the community. So if people are wanting to know a little bit more about that, that's certainly, I do have a component that talks about policing as well, just to make sure that, like we start using things like risk need responsivity principles in policing as well as we use it in corrections.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thanks for coming in.
Great. Thanks for having me.
It was fun. Okay.